Hi. We're seeing such awful news, aren't we, this week from America following the death of George Floyd. He was a black man who, while crying out that he couldn't breathe, was held down, if you remember, by policemen kneeling on his neck for 9 minutes, and 3 of those were while he was unresponsive. So maybe it's not surprising that demonstrations have erupted once more across that country where, well, there is still racism. Many people openly make it obvious they feel black people's lives don't matter as much as those of white people, and others, maybe poor people, not being as important as rich people, or foreigners as much as citizens, or Christians as being more important than those of other faiths or none. But you know, this isn't just an American problem. We know the world is filled with groups of people identifying themselves with folk they agree with, and having other groups that they have worries about, fear or disagree with, or sadly hate. And the world regularly separates into us and them. But what does Jesus want to happen? Well, you know, there's a phrase that Jesus uses in Mark chapters 4 and 5 that illustrates something very early in Jesus' ministry that isn't often highlighted. And I suspect it's because these narratives include the very strong stories of the calming of the storm and the healing of the man called Legion. And that includes the casting out of the demons, if you remember, into the pigs, who then throw themselves into the lake and drown. But here in this early story of Jesus sits the topic of us and them. At the beginning of chapter 4, Jesus has a huge crowd that he's trying to teach, and he pushes off onto Lake Galilee to speak to them from a boat so they could all see and hear him. And then we hear what I think gives us a lead on how we should respond to cries of us and them. When evening came, it says, Jesus says to the disciples, let's go over to the other side. Where was the other side of the lake? The disciples knew, and that side didn't belong to Jesus. The other side was the historic homeland of 7 Canaanite nations. These were the ancient enemies of Israel. And it wasn't just the ancestor tribes of those who could destroy Israel. The other side also had a Roman legion. And the area had Decapolis, the 10 cities where everyone knew they were pagans. And there were no crowds like this side. There was just Legion and these pigs. In fact, Roman legions and pigs. And they had strong memories of invading armies, forcing them to eat pork. In about 100 BC, the pig, as we know, is an unclean animal for the Jewish people, and had been made to eat them by their invaders. And the Roman legions, well, they made sure that they continually reminded them who was in charge, because Decapolis was the home for one of the most famous legions, who several times had fought Judea back into Rome's control. It's the Legio Tenfritensis, and their symbol was a boar, a pig. They wanted to humiliate Israel. So when Jesus said, let's go over to the other side, he wanted to go near them too. Now imagine when the lone man who met Jesus and the disciples at the opposite shore turned out to be demon-possessed, surrounded by pigs, and calling himself Legion. We can imagine what the disciples might be thinking. Going over to the other side to them was a bad idea. But then Legion is healed, and there's the famous account of the demons going into the pigs to then drown themselves. But the reaction of the locals to Jesus on the other side wasn't anywhere like the one of the crowds on their own side. In fact, after the pigs drowned, they pleaded with Jesus to leave. And Legion wanted to leave with Jesus too, with the disciples, but instead Jesus, he said to him, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you. The disciples must have felt it wasn't worth going to the other side, to go over to them. No one joined them, and they were made to feel very unwelcome. But you know, they didn't know what happened next until they went back again to the other side later on. Now, in the interim, we know that the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and we're told that all the people were amazed. The disciples, though, wouldn't have felt there was a good ending, and for the pigs there definitely wasn't a good ending. But Legion spread some good news that day and got the locals' attention. They were starting to be interested. So what of Jesus' next trip to the area of Decapolis? Well, a short while later in Mark's Gospel in chapter 7 and 8, Jesus returns, heals a deaf and mute man, and the word continues to travel, and we get the feeding of the 4,000. Jesus is now getting a crowd where they had previously pleaded with him to leave. He'd engaged with them. Jesus was serious about going over to the other side, going over to them. We know, don't we, that Jesus taught about things like turning the other cheek and loving our enemies and not judging others, and his hope that all his disciples may all be one. But of all the cultures of the world that Jesus has influenced, this is the one we just seem to continually fail to understand. We constantly fall into tribes of us and them. But one of the things Jesus came to achieve was to destroy the principle of us and them. God, our Almighty, the three-in-one, could legitimately have referred to himself as us and of humanity as them, but Jesus came and became fully human. He removed any sense of us and them. Can there be an us and them when we also know from the Genesis account that God created mankind in his own image? In the image of God, we're told he created them male and female. Or can there be an us and them when God said, God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life? Back in early 2015, there was a violent terrorist attack in Paris, if you remember, against a magazine called Charlie Hebdo. It killed 12 people and injured another 11, and it prompted a movement with the slogan "Je suis Charlie," as people identified with the magazine and free speech. But I remember at that time I felt it was a stronger message. I remember speaking on this topic of us and them. That Jesus could equally have said, "Je suis humain." He could have said, "I am human," to identify alongside all. We have these badges made, like this one and like that one, so we as a church could demonstrate the good news of God's kingdom, that we had a common humanity with each other and with Jesus. Jesus removes the barriers between God and humanity. He removes the need for us and them. So in all these troubles in the world, maybe we can hear ourselves as we say, we and them, us and them. Well, I like it this way, but you like it that way. He came to destroy that distinction. We're all human. There should no longer be an us and them. I pray you'll have a safe, good week and be blessed.